Welcome to the Hastings Shadmehry Show.
I'm Andee Hastings.
And I'm Mali Shadmehry.
Together, we own Hastings Shadmehry, an Atlanta-based law firm specializing in family law.
This is a space where we talk all things family law and all topics that touch the area of family law, from divorce to custody to self-growth, personal empowerment, and more. We bring you the truth, from our wolf pack to yours. Hello, and welcome to the Hastings Shadmehry Show. I'm Mali Shadmehry.
I'm Andee Hastings.
And today, we are so excited to talk to you about a really hot topic, and that is the timing of filing for divorce. So today, we're talking specifically about divorce and about the timing of actually filing and initiating that case. And we were going to kind of compartmentalize how we discuss this into a few different topic areas, which we're going to get into in a moment. But before then, let's do a check-in. I haven't been here for a little while, I feel like. I'm so happy to be back in a groove, in our podcast groove, and we've missed you guys.
Big time.
So, let's start with it. Andee, are you a warrior or a diplomat today?
I'm definitely a warrior. I've been in trial mode for days now and will continue to be for the next several days, at least through early next week. And I have a client whose case I feel very passionately about, and which is kind of all of them, but
yeah,
and so I'm just in warrior mode. I'm embracing it.
I love it.
How about you?
Okay, I'll tell you in a second because I want to comment on that.
Okay.
On warrior mode from an attorney. It's like when you have a trial approaching, and I know this case too, and Andee's been just maneuvering this case beautifully for years now. This case happens to have been going on a long time. We absolutely adore our client. He's part of the wolf pack. We love him. But, leading up to a trial like that, it is like you're going into battle. And every little detail matters as far as your preparation, but also how you're caring about yourself. And it's like a warrior going onto the battlefield. And I think our mindset here as trial attorneys is, all right, we're gearing up. Someone's life is on the line. Someone's children are in the mix. And so it just speaks volumes about what you're doing this week to get yourself ready, even things down to our weekend before, because trial starts early next week. And it's like everything down to what we're going to do on the weekend leading up to a trial is calculated to success. And it's like measuring the right amounts of stress. We're going to have a lot more stress than normal. Our emotions are not the same. All those sorts of things. Our relationships can suffer because we get so in battle mode. Like there's all kinds of considerations that goes into the mind, body, and spirit for a warrior. And so I just am commending Andee for that, killing it. And as leaders of the firm, we need to run a firm and go perform. And she's killing it. She's killing it.
Thank you. You do it all the time.
Well, it takes one to know one. And there are, yes, when I'm in trial mode, Andee backs me up in that regard and is watching for how can she fill the other buckets, that need to be filled while I'm in warrior mode. So that's where we're at. And I'm very excited to see where you're headed.
Fingers crossed. I feel good about it.
Yes. For me, I'm a diplomat right now.
Okay.
The words that come to mind for me right now are patience and perseverance. Just have to keep balancing those two things for myself. I feel under the weather today. I still have so many things to get done. There's no time to slow down when sometimes I feel like I may need it. And I've been getting better about strategically structuring some rest where I need it so that I can be very on and really fast-paced where we need me. And a lot of my job right now is balancing the needs of the business and the people at the business and supporting the warriors in this firm that are performing. So I've been a bit behind the scenes, giving my energy in that way and feeling a little depleted on my own. And for my own personal, like in the gym and spiritually and those things need to have a little more rest. And so I'm just focusing on that. And I know that that's what makes me a more balanced diplomat and warrior. I am the best for my clients and my team if I'm taking care of myself.
That's right.
So we're just staying patient. I'm doing my things every day and checking the boxes. And even if I'm not going as much as I can be, at least I know I'm putting as much of effort as possible in each of my buckets that I need to. And if that's not 100% in every bucket, at least it's consistent work that's getting us there slowly over time. So very much in a marathon mindset rather than a sprint at the moment, and that's the season that I'm in over here.
I love that. I'm definitely more in the sprint
Yes.
right now. So it's
that.
always good when we're sort of balanced out at any given time. When we're both in a sprint, it can get a little bit tricky.
Totally. We started a new lawyer at the firm this week.
Yes.
Hopefully you guys will get to meet her here soon. So that's been exciting. Some new faces out and about at Hastings Shadmehry.
Cannot wait.
And we're slowly growing and, of course, adding new clients to the mix, into the Wolf Pack. So it's been a good week. And, yeah, I can't really think of any other crazy updates. I got snowed in at your house.
That was fun. It's technically, I think, iced in.
Iced in.
You know, it's Georgia.
Yeah, and Andee and I worked in our cozy clothes in the house with my little baby girl, Stormy, came with me, my dog. I used Andee and her husband's home gym. That was excellent. I needed that during the snow day, and nice to have the Wolf Pack have my back when I needed it because the heat went out at my house. So
Yes.
that was fun.
That was so fun.
It's not fun. Okay, enough about us. Let's get to why y'all are here. Filing for divorce. How many times, Andee, I mean, yeah, I know we can't quantify this, but do you commonly see that people are so concerned when you consult with them about, oh my gosh, when do we actually file?
Right, absolutely. And it's like they don't, there is some guidelines to it, but there's not a magic. And just for the record, the second week of January was National Divorce Filing Week.
Did not know that.
Most divorces are filed in that week than any other week of the year.
Why do we think that is?
I think it's for some of the reasons we're probably going to touch on, which is people getting through holidays and kind of biding their time to get through that. You know, the big timing areas are right after the holidays and right after school goes back in. And so I think it's just people holding it together for their kids for the holidays, primarily.
Totally agree. I think the majority of questions that I have surrounding the timing of filing is definitely they want to get through the holidays and not impact the children potentially. That's probably number one most asked about question, which we'll get to. But also things like, how do I protect my business interests? There are things I need to do as a business owner. Should I do that before I file for divorce? Some of my clients are asking things about, should I be gathering evidence and facts before we file? Things like, does it look good if we're the ones that file or they should file? Does this matter strategically in the eyes of a judge? Things like emotions and being ready to take that plunge. So let's get into it. So we're going to compartmentalize. We're going to talk about kids and custody and considerations for the timing of filing when it comes to children. We're going to talk about financial considerations in the timing of the filing. We're going to talk about the fact gathering and the evidence to be gathering before we file and how that impacts the timing. We'll talk about the emotional piece, and we'll talk strategy. So, topic number one, facet number one. Kids, custody, considerations with timing of filing. Let's go there. If I've got children, we're living under the same roof, and it's time to proceed with a divorce. What are some things to be thinking about and some of the common questions and myths that we might hear in that area?
So sometimes people worry that the mere act of filing is going to affect their custody position, whatever that might be in the case. But once we kind of jump that hurdle and help people understand that that's not really the case, a lot of it has to do with how do you envision the case proceeding? Are you going to be able to live under the same roof while the case is proceeding? You know, one person lives upstairs, the other person lives downstairs. Are we going to need to move out? Do we need to gather information on what that will cost? Are the finances there? Those types of things. And then we also have to figure out what we want the parenting time arrangement to be during that time. Sometimes people can live under the same roof with their kids while a case is pending. And sometimes they absolutely cannot, and it's understandable. You know, divorce is a huge stressor. So depending on what's going on in the situation, we might really need to look at what's going to be best for the kids while the case is pending as far as where people are going to live and what parenting time is going to look like.
So one of the most common myths slash questions that I get is like, is this going to look bad for me wanting primary physical custody of my children if I file?
Right.
The answer is no. That's one of the common things I need to address first with my clients that are very nervous about the timing is a judge is not going to judge you in a negative light for filing for divorce. You're allowed to get a divorce in Georgia. That's why the law has provided so many different statutes that organize how we do this responsibly. And the notion is in family law, and we believe here that family law is a pillar to society, and that in the dissolution of families in American society, we can build a stronger culture if we do it responsibly and we work out an arrangement that's done with the best interest of the children in mind. That's how our laws are structured, with the best interest of the children, not the parents, at the core. But yeah, that's my long-winded answer of saying, look, timing as far as it impacts custody, we need to roll with it, and you don't hold off on filing for divorce just because you're scared of what it could do to a custodial arrangement. There might be a very limited fact pattern that I'd be worried about, such as someone has not been sober for that long, and they need a little bit more time under their belt to establish some sobriety to show that, I'm sticking to the program. I see that fact pattern a lot, that maybe we've struggled with addiction throughout the marriage. That is going to affect what you're going to get out of a parenting plan. And the best thing to do there is to establish a consistent pattern of sobriety and responsibility, taking responsibility for your actions, getting your life together before going through the divorce, to show that basically to show that I didn't just get my act together to look good for a judge. I had already been doing that, and then the divorce occurred. That's one example that I could think of, that maybe we need a little more time under your belt. Get your life together a little bit so we have an established track record. I'm trying to think of other examples as far as children go.
I think for me, and I've had several of these recently, I think some people, it's not so much the timing of the divorce from a legal standpoint, it's from a practical and life standpoint. Mm-hmm. I have folks that struggle with it because they know that things are going to necessarily change once they file. Mm-hmm. And I think some folks are just nervous about the unknown and, how much time am I going to have with my kids? And by filing this, am I going to be, losing a lot of time and those sorts of things. So it's really more of an emotional thing. And it's not unusual, I think, to see people holding back because they're just really afraid of that unknown. Yeah. And so that's something that we try to talk our clients through as well. That's one of the reasons why it's so important to have an attorney that obviously knows kind of what they're facing, what the likelihood of certain scenarios are, particularly in their jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. And some of it's just fear. People fear things and that may not even be accurate. Mm-hmm. And that's normal. There's all kinds of misinformation on the internet. The internet's a wonderful thing in some ways, but there's a lot of information out there that isn't accurate, and it's scary. So, that's one thing that I would say. If you're worried about it from the perspective of, I don't want to lose my kids, and sometimes you have a spouse that's filling your head with stuff, as far as what's going to happen to you if you decide to file, I'm taking these kids. And, we hear that kind of thing all the time. And so that's more of the practical rather than the legal aspect and how it affects people as humans. And, we talk about that too, because that's not real most of the time. When someone threatens that if you're gonna file for divorce, they're gonna take the kids away from you, that's often just not something that is even remotely grounded in reality. That's just attempt at power and control.
Yes, and Andee, you've been mentioning the propensity of most people to say, I want to wait to file until after we get through Christmas or whatever the next big holiday is. We have a summer vacation planned. I want to get through that and let the kids enjoy that. So a lot of times what I see is that someone comes and consults. We put a game plan together. I educate them. One of our lawyers educates them. And they come back and say, okay, I'm going to retain you. I want you to get everything together. I want all my documents drafted. And I want to tell you when I'm ready to pull the trigger and have you file. And I want it to be after school's over for the kids or after some big event. And that seems to work fairly well. Would you be punished in court for filing right before the last day of school? No. No. What would be punishable behavior is if your spouse reacts and involves the children and says, look what your mom or dad did. That's where I think a lot of the fear comes from, is what is my spouse's retaliation going to be when we file, and how is that going to impact the children? And if your spouse is going to do that, that's going to impact their position in the case, not yours. But I absolutely understand not even risking putting the children through that. That tends to be the bracing that I see for the most part. So we're very respectful of that. I think it flows the best. Kind of how it works and what it feels like is this. I like when my client consults with me and comes to the table with an idea. You mentioned this, Andee, about what they're looking for in a parenting plan. A lot of people don't know, and they use this first consultation with us as, let me figure out what I want. And that's fine too. But it's best if you thought through it a little bit. Like, in a perfect world, when we are divorced, I want this as my custodial arrangement, and this is the parenting time arrangement. And then the lawyer would be there to talk to you about how realistic that may or may not be. You get through the consultation, and you retain your lawyer, and then let your lawyer draft everything so it's ready to be filed, so it's organized, not being slapped together quickly. And it can be sent to you, all these documents that need to be filed to initiate the case. You can review it. You're doing it at your pace and relaxing into it. And I know this is my perfect world. Not everybody can do that. You may be in an abusive situation, need to get out quickly, and that's okay too. But perfect world, you take a minute, look at the documents, and when you're ready, we file for divorce at a time that you think would be most beneficial, that if there were a retaliation from the spouse, your children wouldn't be as impacted. And I oftentimes get people asking me about, do they need to talk to the kids before they file for divorce? What say you, Andee, about that question?
I think that, generally speaking, it's not viewed favorably to talk to the kids and involve them in legal proceedings. And so usually what I recommend to people when they're asking that question is to talk to a therapist and get guidance on the best way to share it with the children. I mean, obviously the ideal situation would be that the two of you agree on how you want to tell them.
Yes.
And when, and you do it together. That's not always possible, but I would say that barring that, you definitely need to talk to a therapist, give them some of the background on your situation, and have them help guide you in that, because that could backfire on you very quickly. And talking to the kids is a very delicate issue. Yep. And involving them in the litigation, even if that's not what you intend to do, that could be the net result, and we want to be very careful about that.
I love it, and I totally agree. And we're going to move into sort of another facet of this timing conversation, but, to reiterate, when it comes to your kids and the custodial outcome in the case, what's going to happen with the ultimate custody arrangement, you can file at any time, and you're safe to do that because the law is designed that way. So keep that in mind. We have to do what's best for you as a parent, and if that means filing right before Christmas, that is okay. Remember, it's how the other person retaliates. That's on them. So that's the big thing that I would take away there. And that if you feel like it's safer, and most people do, a lot of my clients, you want to wait to file after a big event, that's okay too. So right. There's freedom there, and your lawyer's going to guide you either way. And a lot of times people plan to wait to file after the big event, whether it's Christmas or whatever. But things get so bad at the house before then that they need to pull the trigger and file before then, and that's okay too. You've got options. You're not trapped because of that, and the law provides safe ways to do this for children. Okay, so another kind of commonly asked question/topic is, okay, Andee, I'm here to file for divorce, but should I do it before I even know all the evidence that I have? Should I be trying to take screenshots of the drug needles all over the tables that my spouse is leaving before we file? Should I be getting into all of our bank accounts and pulling financial information before we file? The question is, should I be waiting to file for divorce until I gather more evidence? Andee, what do you think?
It's not required to do that, because we have a discovery process during a divorce case so that we're going to go about getting this information with regards to bank accounts and things like that. I will say practically, some people like to have as much of that information as possible before they file. It usually stems from a very, very normal amount of anxiety about the unknown. Mm-hmm. And, the more we know about the details of finances and that sort of thing in the consultation, mm-hmm. the more guidance we can give on, reasonable outcomes and that sort of thing. However, it's not necessary. In some situations, it's just simply not possible. In an ideal situation, could you gather as much as you possibly can? Sure. I tell people there are ways to potentially reduce your costs in case, and to the extent that you can be an information detective and gather information that's reasonably accessible to you, then sure, go for it. But does it have to hold up the filing of your case? No. The likelihood that things might go under lockdown by one party or the other once you file is great, but we have ways to get that information. So if you need to file immediately for whatever reason is going on, in your situation, I wouldn't let that hold you up. That's generally what I tell people. What about you? What do you think?
Whatever information you have gathered, whether it's a feeling, whether it's things you've seen, a few screenshots you've pulled here and there, some basic beliefs that you've gathered about what's been happening and why you need this divorce, and you come with that initial information to a consultation with a lawyer, that is enough to file for divorce, period. We don't have to have a laundry list of every little evidence and piece of evidence and bad thing that's been done. And we don't have to know all about your financials either. If you don't have access to accounts, that's okay too. And if you just bring information that gives a general outline of why you want a divorce to a consultation, our law is set up in a way that we can file then, and it's not going to weaken your case because, as Andee said, once we file, we can do something called discovery, which is the fact-gathering process, and you can gather facts and evidence. Your lawyer has the power to do that, to get the evidence we need to gather to prove our case and get what we want out of the divorce. So definitely holding off on filing just to go gather more information is something you're not going to see me advise regularly. There are some conversations I have sometimes with clients where we weigh options because there are pros and cons to this. One con that I have experienced is my clients bringing me actually way too much evidence and things that I don't need, that are not going to be relevant, but they are going to demand that I read it, look through it, and I do understand where that's coming from. And I'm the kind of lawyer, and our lawyers here at this firm will do that. But in a way, you could be an impediment to yourself, and you're going to increase your legal bill needlessly by throwing way too much information at your lawyer. Instead, what I prefer is a conversation about things you have gathered, and let your lawyer decide what they want out of that instead of just throwing it at them and saying, I expect you to absorb all of this. So there's a fine dance there. It could become a con if you're going to do that. Your lawyer is the master of what evidence we need. And as we build a relationship together, we know what to ask for. So that's just one thing to think about. I do think it's beneficial to try to log into financial accounts that you legally have access to and get a summary. We've talked about that on here before. Get a bullet point list of what you think you have. And if you don't have access to something, but it does exist, just note that. A general, even just 1 hour cleanup of here's what I think we have financially. I do have access to tax returns. That's enough. You don't have to go locate all of this stuff before you file.
Right.
We will help do that. Okay. But here's one of the big questions. If I suspect that my spouse is cheating, should I gather enough evidence to prove the cheating before we file so I can file on the grounds of adultery? Should I hire a private investigator to do this tracking of the spouse before we file? That's a hard one. I surprised her with that.
I love surprises. Actually, it really depends. I think that adulterous behavior doesn't necessarily have the impact on a divorce case practically that it does on a party emotionally. And sometimes, I tell people I don't need every dirty deed documented in order for us to proceed with a case because, like Mali said, you can get a divorce on the grounds that your marriage is irretrievably broken, and the issue of adultery will come in under topics within a divorce like alimony, conduct is an element, or equitable division. And so do you have to nail all that down beforehand? You don't. Some people need to for themselves. They need to know. They need to see it with their own eyes. They can feel it. They can suspect it, but they don't want to believe it. The only situation where it comes up, I find, where it may be important absolutely to get that information before you file is if the other spouse is committing adultery and you anticipate that they're going to be seeking alimony. Because under Georgia law, adultery is a complete bar to the receipt of alimony in the state of Georgia. So if you're in that circumstance, that specific one, that's where I definitely tell people, well, we need to lock this down before we file.
Agree.
But outside of that, it's not necessary. Some situations it feels helpful. I mean, because it can play into a lot of different things. If you know your opposing party is going to be seeking primary, but they're traveling, every single weekend to go on trips with their paramour rather than taking care of their kids. I mean, there's all these different details, but necessary, not specifically. What do you think?
I would say my approach and my answer is a little more aggressive and abrasive than Andy's. Because I actually do get asked quite commonly. I think that my clients will say, I think they're going to ask for alimony. And even if I, as the lawyer, think it's not a strong alimony case, it doesn't stop the other side from asking.
Right.
And to me, it can be a much more streamlined negotiation once the divorce is filed, if we do have proof that adultery happened, or we've got some more proof from a private investigator of some real behavior that's happening. Even if I don't think it's a strong case for alimony, but there's even the slightest concern that the other side's going to ask for it, I'm going to want that ideally before we file, in my perfect world, because in Georgia, we can file for divorce on the grounds of irretrievably broken, and we can amend that later and say we want to add adultery to the table because we've gathered more evidence and we want to add that to the table. But it's not as strong. The best option is, if you're going to file on grounds of a conduct-related thing, cruel treatment, habitual intoxication, I'd love to see a little more proof of that before we actually put that in the pleadings and file for it.
Totally agree.
So there is a little more emphasis from me, I would say, that, look, if you're going to want a divorce on some conduct-related grounds, whether that's adultery, cruel treatment, habitual intoxication, I, as a practitioner, am probably going to want to see a little bit more of that before we look like we're just crying wolf on paper.
Yes,
That
I agree with that.
can be seen as frivolous. So it's a fine line, and we're here talking in theoretics with you. It's something your lawyer's going to have to get to the bottom of with you. So especially, though, if you are the breadwinner by and large, and there's a big income discrepancy, and we have a stay-at-home parent, and we do believe there's cheating, I am going to push to find information before we file, so that we can file from the very beginning on those grounds. It's no secret, no need to play hide the ball. There you go.
I totally agree.
The last sort of thing I'll not advise, but I'll recommend, don't do it, is setting up evidence booby traps to try to do or obtain before we file, and recording conversations and trying to push people into this evidentiary, benefit for yourself and record things. No, we're not doing that. They're not doing this with rehearsed stuff like that. Don't go try to do any of that. Meet with a lawyer if you're having those questions. It's one thing to take a snapshot, because this is just an example I've had. It's one thing to take snapshot of heroin needles that you found on the table, and you want to show that to your lawyer. But it's another thing to really set someone up, and because that always comes out later and it complicates things. I want to see organic things have happened and come to me authentically, and I will help structure anything else more specific after that. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I have one caveat to that, which is, a lot of folks now have nanny cams and that sort of thing, and it helps capture things that are going on organically, as opposed to what Mali said, which is like a set-up conversation. And you can kind of tell when somebody's setting somebody up in a recording. But one thing, and this has to do with toxic narcissists, because a lot of times they can present very differently in court than they do behind closed doors. And so this is the one caveat I have, and it's not to set up conversations. I completely agree with Mali, because it's not going to look real. Because you obviously know that's one of the questions that'll come out on cross. Well, you knew you were recording yourself, so you were on your best behavior, that sort of thing. But, to the extent that you can capture in sort of organic ways around your house the behaviors that we're going to need to talk about, but that your spouse is very adept at hiding in short bursts of time in public, that could actually be helpful. So it's a weird, very specific little caveat, but.
Yeah, one of the most helpful pieces of evidence for me in that regard have been my clients' diaries that they keep.
Yes.
because it's so real, especially when it's been done for many, many years on end. But that's another topic.
Yeah.
So as far as filing and how we're going to weigh timing of filing and how we weigh that with finding evidence, meet with the lawyer. It's not necessary you gather all this evidence before you file. It's not going to hurt you. We have the fact gathering, evidence gathering process, discovery after you file. Adultery is going to be one of the bigger ones. We want to talk about what evidence we want before we file. That's big takeaways from that. And quickly, let's talk about financial considerations before you file. I mean, financially, as far as affording the case, if income's going to change, things about assets and debts, any general stuff in that category?
Yes, there are definite considerations. If, for instance, you have one stay-at-home spouse, either you're that person or the opposing party is, and they're getting ready to start a job, I generally, if I'm drawing a perfect picture of how I want to approach it as a lawyer, I would love for them to get started with that job. So both parties have an income. Sometimes there's timing considerations financially with taxes and whether or not we need to file jointly or separately. And so we need to take all of that into account. If you want to make sure to file jointly, then you need to be married as of midnight on December 31st of the end of the year. And so there's timing considerations with regards to that. If you need to list your house on the market in order to be able to afford to live as separate units, we sometimes have to consider, do we need to list it now as opposed to once we've filed and need to get a formal agreement. So I feel like there's a lot of kinds of ins and outs with that are very fact specific based on your particular case. What do you think, Mali?
I agree. I think, number one, if I'm really talking financials, one thing I'm going to specify here is, can you afford the divorce? But you're going to need some cash flow. You might have to wait to file to save up the funds to afford the type of attorney you really need. You may have to get a loan to afford the divorce, or at least just need some plan. Which credit card are you going to be using to do your retainer? That's just something to think about. And at your consultation, your lawyer is going to help you figure that out. But if you are fearful that you can't afford the actual divorce process, it's something that might impact when we actually file. If you need time to save up, then we need to consider that. That's just a harsh reality. So strategically speaking, this was going to be our last topic, so I'm just going to combine it with this one. The timing of filing. First of all, I like to be the one that files for divorce first.
Same.
Because then you're the plaintiff.
Yes.
And in trial, if you end up in trial, the plaintiff gets to speak first and last. And we like that from a trial standpoint, from a psychological standpoint. But when you file for divorce, there's something that goes into place in Georgia called a standing order, domestic relations standing order. And it's one of the things that when I talk about it, my clients take a deep breath of relief the most. They're like, oh, it is a court order that goes into place and says you must maintain the status quo financially. Maintain the status quo financially throughout this case. You cannot get rid of marital assets or debts, really. You can't get rid of marital assets while this case is pending. You can't just send money overseas while this case is pending. You can't remove assets from the jurisdiction of the court while the case is pending. You can't harass one another while this case is pending, which happens a lot. But you are both bound by a court order, which is the law, that says here's how you behave during the divorce towards one another. Here's how you treat your finances in your estate, your marital estate, which is comprised of all your assets and debts. Here's what you do with all of this while this case is pending. Essentially, it's as though you guys should be frozen in time from a financial perspective while the case is pending, which means if you're a business owner and it's within your normal course of business that you're buying and selling things and you're moving real estate around, then that's permissible. But if someone starts doing some funny business that's not within the status quo and within the normal course of business, that violates the standing order. This one is such a hard topic, that's why we're hitting on it a little more briefly, is like, you need to talk to a lawyer so they can really understand what is it that the normal course of business really looks like for you guys. Another thing to think about, though, is that standing order. If you are concerned about your spouse draining accounts knowing that a divorce is coming, then you need to file quickly. And we need to serve them quickly so that they are bound by that standing order. Because if we need to ask for an emergency hearing, if we need to put some liens on some accounts and some things like that, we can do it. We can freeze accounts essentially if we needed to, if we're concerned about money getting drained or assets being sold out from under you before the divorce is filed because there wasn't a standing order. And that happens.
It does.
Someone can sense that, so-and-so is going to file for divorce, so let me go sell all this property, let me drain my retirement, and now I'm not in contempt of a standing order because no one served me with it yet. I don't think that would go very well in court. But unfortunately, that money might be gone. How can a court get that back? They might be punished. But that's just something you want to try to avoid. So I usually am going to lean towards file timely. We want that file quickly. We want that standing order in place so that we have more control over the estate. It's my general
I totally
philosophy.
agree. And that's generally what I tell people too. But again, there might be things that our client needs to do before filing and to get certain things in order. And so that's just part of the process that we talk about. And my general overarching direction in all of this as far as timing, the timing is yours. And as the client, your lawyer should not be on a particular timeline. We're here to give you advice. We're here to troubleshoot issues. But at the end of the day, we're on your timeline when it comes to filing. Once we file, we're on the court's timeline. But, if you're just simply not ready and your lawyer is pushing you, that's a red flag. So at the end of the day, we're going to give you all of our best advice and tell you what we think and tell you what's the best plan. But if you say, you know what, I'm just not ready yet, that's okay too. And we support that.
Yes, I think my ending thought is I would say that one of the biggest reasons I see people hesitating or being not understanding or knowing when they're ready to file is because of where they're at emotionally. Mm-hmm. I definitely have a lot of clients that say, I don't want to hurt the other person. Yeah. This sucks. I know it's going to hurt when we do this. And there's a lot of bracing in that regard. And so emotional well-being has a lot to do with being ready to file. So none of what we've discussed has kind of gotten into that, and that's not to ignore that issue. That's probably one of the biggest reasons there's hesitance and questions on when to file. And it correlates to what Andee just said, is that is a decision that you are going to have to make, and it can be very painful for some people. Sometimes it's as simple as just being able to acknowledge how sad that it's making you and how scared and sad you are that you feel like you're the one filing and laying down the hammer on the other spouse, on your spouse who's going to be heartbroken about this. So keep it in mind. If that's where you're at, then we need therapy in place probably before you file so that you can move forward confidently. And holding off the filing of the case, I would say, is appropriate no matter what the circumstances are if you feel like you're not ready. Because if you file before you feel like you're ready, you're going to end up spending too much money on your lawyer because you're going to have unnecessary questions. You're going to waver on positions that we're taking. You're not going to trust your lawyer as much, which is normal because you have inner conflicts with yourself, your heart, and what you're trying to accomplish for you and your family. And until we start to get that unraveled a little bit, the divorce is going to be much more tricky and expensive. And I'm happy to do that. And a good family law attorney can we branch over into the emotional side. But our job is to be the business people. You need to handle the emotional side with a therapist. Let us help you make smart business decisions. So that's sort of my ending thought on the emotional piece.
I 100% support that. And, they say it takes a village, and it absolutely does. And you just need a support network around you. And if that includes a therapist to get through this process, which it often does, then that's fairly important. So I know we touch on that a lot, but you can't overstate that.
Yes. So at the end of the day, make sure you're getting a consultation with a good family law attorney who can really hammer down on when should we file and why, and come to the table with your preference on when and why. That's going to help streamline things, and know that there's lots of different considerations and that your lawyer is going to be able to pick when you should do it and be very honest with you about it. So we're hoping that this episode will help you go into that consultation a little more easily, breathe a little more easily, be able to trust your lawyer. We're used to considering all these things. Anything else, Andee?
Not today. We can talk about this all day. I feel like.
Well, thank you for joining us. please follow us on our socials. Hastings Shadmehry, we're on Facebook and Instagram. And definitely be sure to like and subscribe to the show. Share it with any of your friends that you think this might be helpful for in any way. And we are on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. So thank you so much. The Wolfpack loves you. We're happy to have you in our Wolfpack, and we will see you next time.
See you next time.
The Hastings Shadmehry Show is a production of Hastings Shadmehry Family Law and 1066 Productions. It is produced by Kendall Walker and Ned Hastings and edited by Ned Hastings.